morning, Grace Fellowship. All right, so this morning, let's dig into Ecclesiastes now. We're going to be crossing the halfway point this morning in our series on the book of Ecclesiastes. So if you have your Bibles with you, it would be great if you could turn to chapter 7 with me. Whether you have the paper copy or the app version is fine. If you have the paper copy, if you just open it like almost right in the middle and let it flop open, it'll probably almost be right there. So let's watch the scripture video on the screen behind me. You can follow along in your Bibles or on your Bible apps. Ecclesiastes chapter 7. And then we're going to see what sort of wisdom God is pointing us to today so that we can better know him this week.
A reading from Ecclesiastes chapter 7. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This is also vanity. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is good, with an inheritance, and advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. In my vain life I have seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. Be not overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand, for the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. Wisdom gives strength to the wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. Do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. All this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise. But it was far from me. That which has been is far off, and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? I turned my heart to know and to search out, to seek wisdom and the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I found, says the preacher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things, which my soul has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes.
All right, let's just pray together before we dive into this text. Heavenly Father, we thank you again for this chapter that we get to wrestle with today. You've given us much to think about in this passage, and so I pray that as we go through this, we will not feel overwhelmed by the hopelessness that we seem to find in this chapter and that we've seemingly found in this book. I pray that we see this literature for what it is, a vehicle that should drive us closer to you this morning. I pray this in your name. Amen. So again, just a short note about the context of this passage. It was written by King Solomon. God had made this king the richest and wisest king that had ever existed up until this point in history. And if you want to know more about Solomon, I suggest that you go back to some of the sermons from a few weeks, the past few weeks that we have been teaching on this book of Ecclesiastes. You'll find them at gracesask.com, and that'll fill you in on some more of the details of King Solomon if you haven't been with us during those sermons. For today, though, you need to know that this was a rich and wise man, and he had the most wisdom of any man in all the earth, and it's from this position that he writes this book of Ecclesiastes. It has likely been written in the later part of his life, after he has had much experience and he has conducted much research and experienced many things in the wisdom that God has given him to come to these certain conclusions. And with these certain conclusions, he has written these bite-sized pieces of wisdom for us to digest about life. Now, one thing to consider this morning in particular is that we'll not be addressing all these little bite-sized pieces of wisdom, or proverbs as they're called, that he gives us in this chapter. Just due to time constraints, it would be impossible. I'm used to taking like 5 to 10 verses, and this is a whole chapter, so it's we won't be able to digest everything and all of the meaning in these. So then you can gather with your community groups later on in this week, and you guys can have an even greater meal as we go through some of these proverbs in or with your group. I want to today really just give you sort of the method or the way in which to digest these proverbs so you can do it on your own. So now as we go through chapter 7, I want you to notice that almost this entire chapter is made up of these proverbs. When we introduced this series, Clay brought us through the concept of what a proverb is, and these are contained within the wisdom literature that we find in the Old Testament. Proverbs are these unique short statements that are general truths, and often they do play out as a proverb suggests in this world, and even though they may not reflect your reality today. Things may end up different than what a proverb suggests, but regardless, proverbs are these general truths that we find in Scripture. They are wisdom that God has given us to navigate this life on earth with the knowledge that this life on earth is not the ultimate life. But these are the things that He has given us that are generally true as we live here on earth under the sun. And as we go through some of these proverbs today, some of you may be tempted to say, well, I don't get that verse or that proverb. It certainly doesn't prove to be my reality in this world, so why is this even in the Bible? It doesn't even seem like it's true, certainly not for me anyway. And I can just use it just for instance here. There's a proverb in the book of Proverbs called, in chapter 22, verse 6, and it says this. It says, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. Now, some of you may have children that have grown up. And while they were small children under your roof, you taught them about Jesus and the gospel, and you were great parents, or maybe you weren't, I don't know. But in spite of your good training, your children denied Jesus and went their own way. So this proverb may not have been your reality, and you might be tempted to think it's not true. So again, we must understand that proverbs are not promises to us. They are not things that we are guaranteed, but rather they are things that are generally true. They are wise advice, even if the results aren't what you hoped for. And so what we find is this: there are some great bits of wisdom in this book, but even though you adhere to this wisdom, the results may not be what you hoped. And that's okay. It doesn't make these verses any less relevant. They are still great wisdom. We cannot allow ourselves to take one verse out of context and take a proverb to be a guarantee or a promise from God directly to our situation, because that's not what a proverb is. This is general wisdom from God through Solomon. So keep this in mind when we enter the text this morning. You're going to find parts of it that you're going to agree with. You're going to find parts of it that you're going to question and struggle to digest, things that might grate against you. And maybe it's because of your life experience or your cultural upbringing or any other host of reasons. This book is designed to show us that God's wisdom is far superior to man's wisdom. God's plan is far superior to man's plan. And so that's how we must read this entire book. So we'll see today that there are times when this wisdom, when followed perfectly, nets the exact result that you predicted, and there are times when following this wisdom will not net us the result that we had hoped for, at all. But we must understand that this is still wisdom, and following God's wisdom is still the right thing to do, even when things don't work out how you hoped or how you expected. So let's dig into chapter 7. We're going to start off with bits of Solomon's Proverbs here in the first half of verse 1. Solomon says this: a good name is better than precious ointment. Now, what Solomon means by a good name is you could say a good reputation, or kind of meaning that you're a good person. He doesn't mean a good name like Mark. I mean, that's a great name, but that's not what he means. He means that your name is spoken well of in the community around you, in the church. You're a good person at heart. And when people say your name, is that a good thing? Does it make people want to be more like you? And it says here that a good name is worth more than precious ointment. Now, ointment was super expensive back then. It wasn't something that just anyone could afford. It was for the rich. And he says a good name is worth more than ointment. In other words, it's worth more than riches. Seek after a good name more than you seek after money. Now, one example of desiring a good name above riches is to not give in to the temptations of the world to act dishonestly or fraudulently for financial gain. You care about how God has laid out the way in which we ought to conduct ourselves. And so your desire is to be honest and good more than your desire is to be rich. And most of us, we would all agree with Solomon here. This proverb sounds pretty good. Most of us would say that a really good name, or a good name, is a really good thing to have, and it's a really good thing to be a good person. It's good to follow God's plans for how we conduct ourselves as people who believe in Him. A good name among those who you know is a good thing in our estimation. A good name is better than being rich. Some people seek riches at the expense of good morals, and according to this wisdom in Ecclesiastes here, that's not good. It's much better to be a good person than to be known as a rich person. It's much better to be known as a good person who is poor than to be known as a rich person who is a bad person. But let's go a little deeper into our own hearts as we read this simple proverb. We totally agree with it. We like it. We're like, yeah, it's great to be a good person. But let's go into our own hearts here. Remember, Solomon says that a good name is better than riches or better than precious ointment. But he doesn't say that a good name is the ultimate goal or the best thing. It is not a thing to be obtained at all costs. And I say this because of my background. I was raised in a culture that valued a good name at any cost. There would be times when I saw people lie to other people to make them feel good, and this was the accepted practice within the community because it was viewed as being kind and making a good name for yourself. You were kind to that person, and you would lie in kindness. For instance, I would see people who had plans for the evening that were pretty important, but if someone would phone them up and want to come over for a visit, they would lie to the people on the phone and say they had no plans so that they would be viewed as good people and good hosts. Then they would phone the people they had the original plans with and tell them they couldn't go out with them because someone had phoned them and wanted to come over for a visit. And you know what the crazy thing is? The people who had been dropped for the evening always understood because they did the same thing. Lie to one person because it makes them feel better and in turn gain you a better reputation as a good host. That's not what Solomon's getting at here. A good name is better than riches, but it's not the ultimate prize. We're not called to lie to make ourselves look better. We're not called to deny Christ and His commands for the betterment of our reputation. In fact, as a believer, sometimes you will not have a good name in the community. You see, Jesus said this 1,000 years later when He came to earth. He certainly didn't say that a good reputation is bad. It'd be great if we could all have a good reputation. But here in John chapter 15, verses 18 and 19, Jesus says, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you're not of the world, I chose you out of the world. Therefore, the world hates you. You see, as much as a good reputation among the community is good, and it is certainly not something that's easily attained, we see that it's not a sign of you being a Christian or not, and it's certainly not something that's promised to you by Jesus Christ. A good reputation is not something that a Christ follower will necessarily have, but it's precious when they do. People hate Jesus, so they might hate you. They might speak evil of you. They will call you hateful when you take a stand for Jesus. They will not like you for being a Jesus follower. The problem is that so many of us, we see that a good reputation is good, and so we take that verse and we seek after a good reputation for all we're worth instead of seeking after Jesus, much like we seek after other good things instead of following after Jesus. We seek after money, we seek after a good reputation, and all these good things. We seek after wisdom, and they're good things to seek after, but we put them ahead of Jesus, and we lose the mission because all we're worried about is our reputation. After all, it seems that Solomon makes a good reputation here super important, right? No, Solomon said it was a good thing. It's better than riches, but it's not what is to be sought after at the expense of following Jesus. Jesus says, if you are truly my follower, there will be some who will hate you, and it's because of me. You will have a good reputation among some, but do not seek after a good reputation at the expense of making Jesus known and compromising what he has commanded us to do. A good name is good, and it is to be sought after, but it's not the end goal. Don't use this verse in Ecclesiastes to justify seeking after a good reputation among all of the people that you know at the expense of being quiet about the Jesus that you serve. Don't be quiet about Jesus and his gospel for the sake of your own reputation and your good name. I like how Charles Spurgeon writes it. So I'm going to quote him today because I like him, and he has a great quote about this. He says, "Consider it spiritually, and dear brethren, what is a good name? A good name is a name that is written in the Lamb's book of life, and that is better than the sweetest of all ointments." As Spurgeon says, to have your name written in the book of life, now that's the ultimate goal. That's what truly matters. That's what brings life. That's what you can hang on to. That is something that can be grasped. You can count on that. You can't count on a good reputation. It is really precious if you have it, but if you believe that the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ has paid for your sin, you can count on the fact that your name is written in the book of life. You have a place in God's kingdom. You can take that to the bank. So verse 1 of our text, this proverb can lead you in the right direction, and at the same time, it can lead you in the very wrong direction if you interpret the proverb incorrectly. If we put the emphasis of our lives on having a good reputation, we can stray very far from Jesus. So let's walk wisely, interpreting the proverbs as the wisdom that they are and seeking after those things because they are good, but let us not view them as the ultimate end goal. They are tools used in the process of revealing the ultimate goal to us, and that is life in Jesus Christ. These proverbs point us to our need for more than we are and for more than we have on our own without him. Sorry, we've only gone through the first half of verse 1, so let's race through some of Solomon's other examples just to really understand the way in which we must understand Proverbs that God has gifted Solomon through his life of searching for meaning. So the rest of verse 1, he says, "And the day of death is better than the day of birth." So on the surface level, this sounds so wrong. But Solomon dives deep here. From his perspective, the day of death brings an end to hardships, work, toiling, suffering is over, working is over. From our perspective today, we get an even better view than Solomon gets. We know that we get to spend eternity with Jesus if we know him and believe in him. Solomon continues on, and I'm not going to read these all, but let's look at a few of these examples of the wisdom that he gives. It's better to mourn than to feast. Often it's through times of suffering that we learn much. The net benefit of hardship is new perspective, a renewed resolve, a clearer picture of God and how he works. Solomon didn't say feasting and celebrating is bad, but he's helping us to see that the benefit of suffering is more. He's not saying that we must be in suffering all the time and suffering is the ultimate goal, but it does offer us benefit. It does offer us gain in our lives even if we fail to see it at that moment. And if you believe in Jesus, a life of suffering could certainly be your lot. And that's not a bad thing. Verse 4, it is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. It's certainly better for us to hear the truth or a rebuke from someone who is a wise person than to hear a lie that makes us feel better from the mouth of a fool. Solomon is so right here. Verse 9, be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. We see again a reality that lives itself out here on this earth. Foolish people become angry quickly. And I admit I'm often in this category. I am a foolish person, and this proverb helps me to recognize myself as the fool, which humbles me and brings me back to Christ. The pattern that we see throughout these proverbs is that they're good, and God has given them to us to live in a certain way to avoid the pitfalls of Satan and life on this earth and to drive us to Christ. The result of some of the proverbs lived out may not always be what we expect, but it is not as though they are not good wisdom or good advice. It's not as though God's word fails if you see your results of living according to a proverb don't come to fruition as you had hoped. If your reputation is dragged through the mud because of your devotion to Christ, it doesn't make these verses untrue. A good name is still good. Let's not interpret these proverbs as promises to us, and then when our perceived promises don't come to pass, we reject God and we question his goodness and his wisdom offered in this book, and then proceed to fall into a lifestyle of unrighteousness and sin because of our wrong expectations in the incorrect reading of this wisdom that Solomon has offered us. Today we see with great clarity that many have abandoned the wisdom that's contained in this book. Much of our world today looks like what Solomon describes as foolishness. And people think it is wisdom. And as we march through this chapter, we see the exact same thing play out at the end of chapter 7 with this statement in verse 29. Solomon says this, see, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. So Solomon ends this chapter with this observation that many have taken his wisdom and his proverbs, they have abandoned it, as we are so apt to do. He observes that just like today, many men and women have come up with foolish schemes to try and find happiness, joy, meaning, and purpose. And he gives a short description of one of those schemes in the last paragraph of the chapter. He describes a life of sexual immorality and promiscuity, and the same thing we see played out in our culture today, people using sex as a means to find themselves. And Solomon, he's concerned with all this foolishness that he sees going on in the world around him. And he understands that God had created Adam upright and pure, but mankind had fallen from the very first man. And now he could scarcely find a person on earth who was upright and pure, according to verse 28. And Solomon understands that most of the people he has observed do not seek after wisdom as outlined in his Proverbs, and they do not seek after God. Humanity has proved his point from verse 20. He says, surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. The wisdom that's laid out in this chapter by Solomon is good, but his observation is that the human race is not following the wisdom. They do not seek after God. They have come up with their own ways, their own schemes, which seem wise to men, but they fly in the face of God's wisdom. And so humanity has run amok. You see, humanity's problem was prideful sin, thinking we know better than God because our life experiences and our situation and our wisdom. We don't want to absorb the wisdom contained in this book because we think we have it all figured out. We try to make ourselves masters of our own destiny. We take the place of God, kicking him off the throne because we know better. We look at these proverbs and we rebel against the truth of them with our own wisdom. We don't want to believe the rebuke of a wise man is better than the praise of fools. We love praise. We don't want to believe that sorrow and death is better than laughter and feasting, and so we seek out pleasure with anything, with money, sex, alcohol, drugs, anything really, things, rather than relishing the opportunity to gain wisdom in hardship, from verse 3. So we ignore the wisdom that lies in Ecclesiastes and we pursue foolishness. We've all done it. Some of us are doing it right now. Chapter 7 of our text, this chapter that we're going through today, it ends on a very negative note. Solomon doesn't get to see a changed humanity yet. But I want you to know that Ecclesiastes chapter 7 is not the end. All of the unrighteousness that Solomon sees in the people at the end of the chapter is not the end of the story, for which I'm very thankful. After Solomon, Jesus came to fix our unrighteousness, our sinfulness, filthiness, our unworthiness. Many years after Solomon, again, Jesus comes offering wisdom that is so contrary to the best of all of man's wisdom. Solomon said to die is better than to be born, and he was right. And Jesus revealed why. Jesus says, die to self and be born again. We die to the desires of self and we're given new life by Jesus Christ. Jesus died on the cross. He rose again to offer us new life, a rebirth that gives us meaning and purpose more than we can imagine, joy beyond our comprehension. He takes our guilty verdict for the charge of our sin, and he pays for it himself and declares us pure. When we believe this truth, we're born again. The unrest of the guilty conscience is gone. The search for meaning has found an end, and Christ's purity is given to us even though we're dirty sinners. This solves the problem of the unrighteous people such as you and I that Solomon was observing during his time here on earth. Jesus gives us the firm foundation and the peace that comes by knowing we are secure in him, by his death and his resurrection. Undeserving, unwise, sinful people getting a purity and a righteousness that they don't deserve. You and I getting the purity of Christ even though we're the worst of sinners. This is grace and mercy for those times when we step outside the bounds of what God has called us to do with the wisdom that he has laid out for us. Solomon says to die is better than to be born. Jesus takes it even further and he says if you try to hang on to this earthly life, you're going to lose it. That's a guarantee. But if you lose your life for my sake, you have gained true life. Matthew 10:39. This seems like such backwards logic or wisdom for us humans, but it's always true and right. He paid for your sin with his blood and he will not let you go. He rose again to spend eternity with you. He's not fickle. He doesn't waver. Jesus is your strong tower. If you repent and believe in him, he is your Savior. He turned the wisdom of this world upside down when he came, much like we've seen in many of Solomon's Proverbs. And we can trust what Jesus says is true because he died to prove it. The world says you need to find yourself or you're going to continue to be dissatisfied as Solomon was. Jesus says you need to lose your life for his sake and you will truly find it in him. Jesus came to earth to die to offer life. It seems so counterintuitive that one would have to die to offer life. But it's true. God has given us the wisdom of Solomon's book of Ecclesiastes not to confuse us, but rather to show us that God's wisdom is higher wisdom than ours. And in his wisdom, he came up with a plan to save the sinner who's rejected God in his wisdom. God in his wisdom used the foolishness of sin and humanity to execute his plan to redeem a people to be with him in eternity. He executed a plan that we sinners could be washed of our sin, that we could be made clean and pure and right. And this is the hope that I have. Is this your hope? When I look at all of the ways that I have offended God the Father in scoffing at his wisdom and doing things my own way and placing myself on the throne of my life, I only have one hope, and it's not in my wise and cunning plan to save myself, because I don't have one. My only hope is Jesus Christ, who died to save me from my sin and then rose again to offer me the greatest privilege of all time, to spend eternity with him. Would you believe this all-wise, all-knowing, and all-powerful God today? He gave us wisdom to navigate this life, but so much more, he sent his Son so that you may have life and live in his wisdom. Father, we thank you for your infinite wisdom and your never-ending love for those of us who believe in you. I pray that we seek your wisdom in your word so that we may know you more each day. Pray this in your name. Amen.